Hello and welcome to the APC 24 Industrialising Net Zero Automotive Technology Applicant Briefing. So this briefing is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be made available to you, and you can also request a copy of the slide deck via our customer support team if you wish. As we go through the webinar, please pop any questions that you have for any of the speakers on the call in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at respective points within the briefing. So a few welcome and introductions. We have on today's call myself, Rachel Evans, a Senior Portfolio Manager within Innovate UK, Sarah Selwood, a Portfolio Manager within the Competitions team at Innovate UK, Zoe Hall, who is Head of Competitions at APC, Dan Bunting, who's our Business and Development Manager at APC, and Charlotte Fleetwood, who's looking after the value for money piece, and she's from the Department of Business and Trade. So Innovate UK is the UK's innovation agency. We drive productivity and economic growth by supporting businesses to develop and realise the potential of new ideas, including those from the UK's world-class research base. So our mission is to help UK businesses to grow through the development and commercialisation of new products, processes and services, supported by an outstanding innovation ecosystem that is agile, inclusive and easy to navigate. At this point in the briefing, I'm going to hand over to Zoe Hall to talk you through the scope of this competition.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning. I'm Zoe Hall, Head of Competitions and Projects here at the Advanced Propulsion Centre, and I'm pleased to announce the latest funding round from the Department for Business and Trade delivered by the APC. Next slide, please, Rachel. So we'll start with the overview of the process itself. The scope for APC 24 has intentionally largely stayed the same as the previous APC 23 competition. We are still looking for collaborative R&D projects that design, develop and manufacture technology that work towards delivering net zero on-vehicle technologies for on-road and off-road vehicles. Can I draw your attention first and foremost to the public description? This needs to be a short description in layman's terms of your project and will be published. So do think about what you want to put in this entrance. Question 1 is a mandatory question on applicant locations, and the rest of the application is then split into parts. So part 1 looks at the business case and the benefits of the proposed project and is covered by questions 2 to 5. Part 2 then addresses the technical innovation, the project management and the risks associated, and this is questions 6 to 8. We then move on to questions part 3, and this is questions 9 to 11. And here we're focusing on the funding and the added value. Question 9 is where you'll download the value for money Excel workbook. Question 10 looks at additionality, and then 11, the funding model itself. And then part 4, it gives you the opportunity from questions 12 to 14 to provide supplementary evidence in the workbook. So effectively you're putting quantitative data into the Excel workbook, and then you're explaining the assumptions that you've put in that book. DBT will provide you with the detail on how to fill this out shortly. So parts 3 and 4 are appraised by the DB team appraisers and economists there, and they will also consider your answers to the technical questions to determine the benefits of the project from a value for money perspective. Likewise, the technical panel, who will be marking parts 1 and 2, will consider your answers to questions 9 to 14. And the reason why I flagged this is primarily because if you are successful in getting to phase 2 of the assessment process, you might find that some of the questions from the technical panel and the economic panel are at first appearance quite similar. And that is because they'll be looking at it from a different aspect. So do answer those questions thoroughly. And then lastly, question 15, that is around the market contact. And that's purely so that the APC and the DBT communications team have got the right person to speak to. Next slide, please. So hopefully you're very aware of the timelines that you can see on the screen, but let me draw your attention to a few things. So first of all, if you're not familiar with the APC collaborative R&D competitions, they're run as a two-stage process. So that means that you have the initial application, which we'll go through in detail today, and then you'll have a second stage should you reach the quality threshold to proceed. So the application deadline is 11 o'clock on the 20th of September, and there are no exceptions to this at all. We say this every time, I'm sure Rachel will also reiterate it later, but at least one applicant, if not several, miss the deadline every single competition round. So please make sure you have plenty of time. Do not leave it to the last minute. And one thing to point out, there seems to be some challenges at times with ticking the T and C's box. Every single partner needs to do this. So can you please make sure as lead partner that you have gone around the consortia and they have all ticked this box. Otherwise you'll get to the deadline point and you won't be able to submit your application. The other thing that I'd like to really stress is this second stage that you can see in front of you now. You'll be notified on the 13th of October, as you can see, if you have reached the quality threshold to proceed to this second stage. And there is an awful lot of activities that you need to do as a consortia at this point. So then you'll have until the 23rd of October to respond to a substantial set of questions raised by the DBT appraiser team. In addition, you will also have, or potentially also have, a telephone consult with those said appraisers on Wednesday, the 1st of November. The next deadline is the 30th of October. You'll then have to respond here to all the technical questions that you've been given. And then you need to switch gears and concentrate on the presentation, which is due on the 9th of November for the panel interviews. You can't change this presentation at this point, so what you submit will be what you present on the day, and you'll also have to submit a list of people that are going to attend that presentation, which is up to 9 people. I cannot stress how many times consortia have failed to leave enough time, enough resource to this second stage. They may do really well at technical assessment, and then they fall over at this stage. So please plan for a positive result, plan that you're going to be successful, put your resource in place, and make sure that you've got enough time to work together as a collaboration to respond to all of these elements. And then the last bit to point out is the interview panel. So the interview panel dates are Monday the 20th of November through to Friday the 24th. You'll be allocated a time slot by Innovate UK, and this is unlikely to be able to be moved. So please again, book out that time. Thank you. Next slide, please, Rachel. So onto the scope itself. If you applied for APC 23 or if you joined the briefing for APC 23, this hasn't fundamentally changed. We have circa £20 million worth of match funding available, and we're looking for pre-production projects that are late stage research and development that will help accelerate the UK towards a net zero automotive future. So these projects should support the UK's long-term vision and underpin capability by securing that long-term investment, R&D investment, and also achieved through the associated supply chain, the design, build, test, and manufacture of net zero carbon vehicles. So what you need to do, your proposal needs to be UK based. It has to be collaborative, as I say. It must be late stage, so therefore it needs to have that route to market. Match funded, which I'll talk about on the next screen. Focused on the automotive sector, but obviously if you do have cross-sector utilisation, that will be considered a benefit. And lastly, ensure that there is upskilling, reskilling, and sharing of knowledge within the UK auto sector. Next slide, please. So as the APC platform is supported by the Auto Council, the projects must align with the strategic technologies as defined by the Auto Council. And you'll see here the tech that is in scope for this particular competition. While you're reading that, in addition, your project must have total eligible costs. So that's project costs that can vary between 2.5 and 20 million in terms of grant funding. As this is match funded competition, you must ensure that the grant ask does not exceed 50%. That's not to say that you want to max out at 50%. If you, if you can do your cost fee grant, which is greater, then that's advantageous. Obviously, it demonstrates the value for money. But what we do need to do is maintain that 50%. So therefore, if you have RTOs or you have an academic in the consortia, then you do need to make sure that you balance across the rest of the consortia partners. Project duration should be between 18 and 36 months. So again, just watch out, because we have had competitions in the past that were up to 42 months. This is a 36-month competition. Like I say, there needs to be a clear route to market. So that's through a vehicle manufacturer or a tier 1 supplier, and it must contain an SME partner. We recommend a suggested max of 6 partners. It is a recommendation, it is not a requirement, but we have just learned from experience that actually if you have a large volume of consortium members, it becomes a harder project to deliver, obviously. But if you can demonstrate that you do need a large consortia to deliver the project, that's absolutely fine. So on to the questions themselves. So question 1 simply asks the location, so we won't dwell on that, and that is where the work is being carried out, not your organisational location. Question 2 then, we look at the business case, and this is front and centre in the line of questioning. We want a really strong description of the business case, which should be explained in sufficient depth to understand why the project is taking place and how the project links with your overall organisational strategies. We need to understand the benefits to the consortium members. These should be clear in order to be able to justify where a collaborative R&D project is taking place. A useful bit of advice here is to probably worth outlining the response to this question in the first instance, but actually complete it last. And the reason why I say that is that as you go through writing the application, different partners are saying giving you different bits of information. It's worth making sure that the context all hangs together from start to finish. So I would suggest you come back and make sure this is the polished question once you've completed the rest of it. So on to question 3, and we're looking at the market here. So you need to make sure, and also critically evidence, that you have a well-researched and understood market and how your project is going to bridge the gaps in the market that you see. So explain how this technology, you're going to bring it to market and exploit its commercial potential. So what you're looking at here is things like the scale, the geography, the dynamics of the market. Make sure you put your evidence in there, so working calculations and how you've got to those stats. Look at the market exploitation strategy for the various organisations within the consortia, and make sure you include any barriers and how you propose to overcome this. And again, reference your competition. Typically, this question is answered quite poorly, and that's primarily because the evidence is lacking. So make sure any assumptions, any statements are backed up by evidence. And also include any evidence of customer interest here in your appendices to give it additional credibility. So question 4, got a couple of questions here now that relate to benefits, but we have separated them out so that you've got a clear benefits to consortia and then benefits externally, such as supply chain. So question 4 is all around supply chain benefits. And we're looking for significant supply chain benefit here throughout this competition, and your strategy on how you're going to achieve this. Again, evidence is crucial, and you're looking to explain how you're going to anchor, you're going to grow, or you're going to significantly improve the productivity and competitiveness of the UK supply chain through this project, and your target suppliers and customers as a result of it. If you pass the initial assessment on this question, it is important to note that if you proceed to the interview stage, any project scoring in excess of 60% at interview will be eligible for funding. So in the appendices here, I suggest you provide a supply chain or a value stream map. And in that map, please cover things like potential suppliers, the gaps that you've identified in your current supply chain, any processes required, whether they be improvements or new processes that are needed to deliver. Include companies, include locations that you've been identified, and also any work that you've done on sort of supply chain risk prediction and management. We recognise that this you won't be able to identify all your customers or all your supply chain here, but you know, if you do identify elements of supply chain, identify those gaps, then again it all adds up to the credibility of your application. One thing it is important to note though is do not include supply chain jobs in your value for money workbook, as those will automatically be deducted. So don't go to the efforts of doing that. They will not be included. So question 5, we're looking here, switching to the benefits of collaboration. And you're looking to explain why it is essential that this collaboration has been pulled together to deliver this project, and explain how knowledge will be shared amongst the partners. So you're looking at the impact here on resources, and when I say resources, I mean both personnel and facility, and the skills that your consortium are going to bring together to maximise those outputs. You're looking at how the project will unlock technical and commercial opportunities, what further applications, outcomes are going to become into potentially other sectors, opportunities for wider R&D activities in the auto industry, and how you'll disseminate all of this information out into the public domain. Like I say, it is auto-focused, this competition, but if you can demonstrate that cross-sector ability of the tech, that will be advantageous. Again, you've got to provide a substantial data, quantity of data and evidence here. So keep your answers brief and make sure you use the appendices well. So now on to question 6, key critical question here for the technical assessor panels, as you'd expect. And we're looking for the technical approach and innovation. You must provide here an overview of the technical approach that your project's going to take, and clearly identify the main objectives of this project. Which elements are technically innovative and how these outcomes are going to be achieved at the end of the day. So start off with a description of the entry, design and development status of the various elements, components within the project. You're then going to do a technical steps of how these outcomes are going to be realised, and make sure that you've got evidence of any proof of concept work that has been undertaken prior to this application to clearly evidence where you are on that TRL progression level. Technically innovative elements of the project, call those out and evidence why they're innovative, and then look at the resulting technologies and compare them to best in class or current best in class, if you like. So what's on the market today, and how your product component is going to be a step change from that. And then the other bit we've added into this question is that as well is any test and validation activities that will be completed during the project itself, and then anything that needs to be done after the project. Also evidence any IP or patents that you're expecting to gain throughout the project. You fundamentally need to convince the assessors that what you're proposing is both sensible and achievable, but do concentrate it here on a technical approach, because the project management approach is a subsequent question. So just focus on the technical bit here. Right, on to question 7. So like I said, this is where we focus on project management. And here you're probing to identify, define how this project is going to be delivered and exploited successfully. So you're looking at what the physical outputs and deliverables from this project will be, and quantify where possible. You need a comprehensive workbook breakdown structure showing, if possible, estimates of cost for each work package. Your project plan needs to be seen in enough detail to identify the significant milestones, gateways, interdependencies, so things that are critical on that critical path. We don't need a 200-line plan that we can't see. Hopefully you'll be able to demonstrate that you've got that. It's just that key critical path of delivery for the project and who is delivering what. You need to be able to demonstrate your project management approach, tools, mechanisms, and how you've done this before and how this is transferable into this particular project. How are you going to start up on time? How will this be managed? How will it be managed across the consortia? Any key personnel in terms of senior sponsors that will be looking after this project, and how you're going to manage things like escalation, for example. Like I say, a clear Gantt chart is essential here. And if you provide something that's illegible, not enough detail, it will be a challenge for the technical assessor panel. So please make sure that you spend enough time, speak to us at the APC to make sure that you've got enough detail in there, that it's legible, and that because it is a critical thing for the technical assessors, and it upsets them greatly when they have a project plan that they can't use. So spend some time on this question. It'll demonstrate your credibility to deliver a successful project. So question 8. Question 8 is all about risks. And it's the last question I'm going to talk about today. So we want to look here at the risks, both within the project life cycle, but also beyond. So effectively what we're saying is, what are your risks to the project, successful project delivery, and then what are the risks to the successful exploitation and benefits recognition. Include your risks, don't avoid any, make sure the key ones are there, and make sure you've got suitable mitigations and budget where it's needed. This question, again, is answered poorly generally, and the reason why it's answered poorly is because it becomes quite generic and not project specific and not consortium specific. So make sure that there's enough detail in there that clearly points to this particular project, and that it's not concentrated on perhaps the lead partner, that there are, that risks have been understood by all of the collaboration. And that sort of gives you the evidence that you've got a cohesive bit. So thank you very much. I think that's me. I'm now going to hand over to Charlotte from DBT to go through the value for money questions. Thank you very much.
Questions come in. The first one is asking us how many applications are likely to be funded. Can't really answer that, to be honest. We've got a budget available up to 20 million. We'll have a whole host of projects that will need to complete the entire assessment process before they're eligible for funding. So unfortunately, we can't give you an answer on that. But keep an eye on our announcements that we make. You'll get a feel for the number and type of projects that get funded. The next one is about collaboration and TRL. So sometimes projects come to us oven ready with a strong collaboration in place, partners that have worked together. But if you are seeking partners and seeking collaboration, then please get in touch with the APC. There's an email at the end of the presentation that describes how to get in touch. In terms of TRL, broadly speaking, we're talking TRL 5 through to TRL 8. This is late stage R&D, it's industrialization, associated MRL development is also expected. But from time to time, some elements of the projects come through at slightly earlier TRL. So that's another discussion to have with us at the APC. So that's the questions for now. Keep them coming in and we'll come back to them at the end of the presentations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Dan. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, we are now going to hand over to Charlotte from the Department of Business and Trade to talk us through the value for money piece. So over to you, Charlotte.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, so I'm Charlotte and I work in the Department for Business and Trade, and I'm going to be talking to you about the value for money side of the assessment process. So if you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So I'm going to try and cover three things here. I'm going to try and briefly explain what we mean by when we talk about value for money and why it's important to this process, and then I'm going to explain what information and evidence we need to be able to make that assessment of value for money as part of this process. And then the last area is to show you the value for money workbook and sort of explain how that needs to be filled in. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is value for money? Why do we care about value for money? So any government spending must be good value for UK taxpayers. The Treasury requires that public funding for R&D projects like this undergoes a value for money assessment and that it meets a minimum threshold in terms of value for money. Economists here at DBT need to determine each project's value for money, and we do that based on its benefit cost ratio. Next slide. So in terms of the benefit cost ratio, what is that? So we simply look at the expected benefits to the UK economy of the project, and we also look at the cost to the exchequer of the project and create a benefit cost ratio based on those two things. What we're interested in is the benefits to society of the project, rather than specifically the privately created benefits of the project. So briefly, what expected benefits are we looking at here? So the key benefits that we look at here are jobs, CO2 savings, and R&D spillovers. I'll talk through each of those a little bit more shortly, and we get the information on these from the data that you provide in both the written application and the value for money workbook that I will show you. Once we have those benefits, quantified benefits, we then adjust these to take into account risk of the project and something that we call additionality, so the likelihood that the project would proceed in the absence of funding. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So in terms of where we get the information from to make those assessments of risk and additionality, we use the information you provide in your written application. And we also look at the responses that you provide to our written feedback questions that you'll receive, and during the value for money phone call that we'll have with you as part of the process. So those are the benefit side. The cost side is simply the how much funding you're asking for, basically. So if for a set level of benefits that you can provide for this project, the lower the amount you ask for, the better the value for money, essentially. So really think about how much money you need to ask for, and you know, is that the minimum you need to ask for? Next slide, please. So the next bit is I'm going to move on to talk about what information we need to be able to make a robust assessment of the value for money. Next slide, please. Thanks. Excellent. So basically what I've got here is a table showing the various sources of information that we're going to be using to sort of make our assessment, and what we look for in each section. So we've got the written application form. Nick has just talked through a lot of that, so I won't go through all of it. But one of the key things we look for in this application is the justification as for why APC funding is needed for the project to proceed, and why this amount of funding is needed. We'd also what we're looking for in this section as well is an explanation of the project's benefits and the explanation of risks and associated mitigations. Next, we have the value for money workbook, which is an Excel spreadsheet, and here is where we ask you to quantify the benefits. So tell us the number of jobs this is going to create, how much R&D expenditure there's going to be, what the CO2 savings are, and you'll see in that workbook there's plenty of guidance in there to tell you sort of what we're looking for and what information we want you to provide. what spreadsheet matches the narrative that's included. The appendices to each of the written questions where you did, which may be diagrams or and then number 4 at the bottom right to you with some written questions, opportunity for a phone call with you just to information we need to be able to make that assessment. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. So what we're looking for in the application is a logical narrative explaining why the benefits you're telling us about and the costs you're telling us about are reasonable, why they make sense, why they're achievable. Secondly, details of the calculation methods. So how have you estimated the number of jobs that you're going to create? How have you estimated the CO2 savings that are going to be achieved through this? And as part of that, tell us about any assumptions that you've made in those calculations. No worries, Sarah. So supporting evidence. This will mostly be in the appendices that you can provide. And it's basically to help validate the above information. So the sort of things we're looking for in your supporting evidence are diagrams. You can provide tables of costings. You can provide letters of support, for example. You can include Excel spreadsheets if any are useful. But anything that you provide must be clear and easy to follow and be relevant to what we're asking you. If you're not able to back up what you're telling us with sufficient evidence, then we can't give it a good score on the VFM side. We need to have that evidence to back it up, to back up what you're telling us. Okay, next slide. Right, so I'm briefly going to run through a bit more about the 3 key benefits that we're looking at as part of this. So number 1 on that table there is R&D spillovers. So by undertaking R&D, society is going to benefit from that R&D, as well as the project partners themselves. So we're trying to establish the extent to which those R&D benefits are going to spill over outside of the project, essentially. So we get information for this from your written application, and sort of things we're looking for are things like, will you register IP for the technology? Are you going to share project results? How are you going to disseminate the findings of your research and share the findings? Will other firms or industries benefit? And how and where will the technology be used? Is it applicable? Are there applications outside of this project or outside of the sector, for example? In the value for money workbook, specific information we're looking for on R&D is your R&D expenditure figures. There's a table where we ask for the spending profiles for APC grant and your own funds, and any follow-up investment for after the project that might include R&D. But again, we're looking for information on how you've calculated those profiles, and also the impact on the TRL and MRL levels. So number 2, the next benefit is employment. We're interested in jobs that can be created as a result of this project. So we want you, in the written application, we want you to describe what are the job roles within the project and after the project. Explain why the project safeguards certain jobs. So by safeguarding, we're talking about jobs that would otherwise be lost without this project. We need to see evidence of why they would be lost, what would happen to these jobs without the project. And in the value for money workbook, there's a tab in there where you can tell us the number of jobs created each year during the project and after the project. And they might be R&D jobs and they might be manufacturing jobs as well. But again, please do explain how they're calculated. And then lastly, CO2 savings. So there's a tab in the value for money workbook where we ask you to tell us about the vehicles that we use technology and the associated CO2 savings compared to a comparative vehicle. So the basically next best alternative vehicle that would otherwise be on the road. And in the written application, there's a section there for you to explain that information in a narrative. So how does your technology deliver those emission savings? Explain which vehicles will be displaced and why those are the most appropriate vehicles. yeah, and as part of this, obviously ensure that any figures you provide are consistent with emission regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is so additionality is one of the adjustments that we make to your benefit figures. So we want to understand how likely it is that this project or the benefits from this project would be achieved in the absence of APC funding. We also want to try and understand why this particular amount of funding is required. And so you can tell us about this in the written questions. For example, are you unable to raise sufficient funds from other sources, and that's why you need this funding? If that's the case, please provide as much evidence and information as you can around proof of declined credit or why you've been unable to raise sufficient funds. It might be that your project doesn't meet an IRR rate for internal R&D spend because it's too high risk or because it's competing with other projects. If that's the case, please provide analysis to show this and to show how this APC funding makes the difference to that. Is there internal competition from a lower cost location? If there is, show us the analysis that you've done on the cost analysis between the two locations and the decision-making process that's associated with that. And then, so if you don't receive APC funding, what would happen to this project? And we call that the counterfactual. So would the project go ahead but on a smaller scale, or would it go ahead to a different time scale? Would it be undertaken in a different location? So all of this information is going to help us make an assessment of additionality. The evidence behind this is going to the extent to which you can provide evidence to back this up affects the score that we give, because we can only score score it more highly if it has sufficient evidence. Okay, next slide, please. And then project risks. I won't go over this in any detail because Nick sort of talked through sort of risks that we were expecting you to show in the application, but essentially we will adjust the benefits. We'll adjust the benefits depending on the level of risk that we consider. So what we're looking for in your application is that you've considered different types of risks, so not just the technological risks, but also commercial risks, route to market risks, and project delivery risks. And we want to see that you've assessed the impact of those risks and developed mitigation strategies. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so lastly, I'm just going to show you how to fill in the value for money workbook. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So there's on the written form, there's a section here where you can download your value for money worksheet there. You essentially download it, and once you've completed it, you upload it in that section there. So hopefully that's fairly straightforward. Next slide. So the spreadsheet looks something like this. This is one of the tabs in it. There's 3 or 4 different tabs, and essentially where you've got grey cells there, that's where we want you to enter your data. Orange cells are where there's a drop-down list where we want you to select something from a drop-down list, and the yellow cells are ones which are our internal calculations, and so please don't make any adjustments to those or change any of the yellow cells. So it's just the grey cells and the orange cells that you'll need to focus on. At the bottom of each sheet, there's guidance that explains what we want, how you should fill this in. Some sheets, for example, the jobs sheet requires you to input the figures in a cumulative way. So if you're creating 1 job in year 1 and 2 jobs in year 2, the figure in year 2, you should put 3 and present it in a cumulative manner like that. And also, when the figures that you put into the spreadsheet, please do use the written form, the questions in the written form, to explain how you've calculated them, what assumptions you've used, etc. There's questions in the written application that give you the space to explain those. Okay, next slide. yeah, so that's, next slide. Excellent. There's there's a tab in the value for money workbook where we're asking you for information on wider environmental benefits of the proposed project. Currently, this is not assessed as part of our value for money assessment, but it helps us. It's helping us to think about in future the best way that we can make an assessment of wider environmental benefits. So please do fill this in as best you can. The information will be really useful in helping to inform the way we make assessments in future. And I think that's the last slide. Do you want to go to the next one? Yeah, so as I said, the value for money worksheet does have guidance within it, so hopefully that will answer lots of questions. But otherwise, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop me a message. And that's it from me.
Perfect. Thanks, Charlotte. So if we move on to the next slide, so what we're now going to run through is we're going to really briefly run through a little bit about eligibility criteria and how to apply on the IFS system. Now, I know there's a huge amount of information to take in, so I just want to remind you at this point that this briefing is being recorded and you'll be able to gain access to the recording, and if you wish, a copy of the slide deck through a request to our customer support desk. So on the next slide, you will see a brief overview of the eligibility criteria. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because we've already been over it, but it is there for reference. So moving on to the next slide. So the level of funding awarded will depend upon the type of organisation and the type of research being undertaken in the project. So IFS, so the Innovation Funding Service, will calculate your grant percentage based on your answers to the size of the business that you are, along with the research being undertaken in the project. So taking a look at the next slide, you can see here the breakdown that you will receive depending upon what type of research being undertaken within the project. So for those carrying out industrial research, for example, you looking to claim 70% if you're a micro or small and 60% if you're a medium sized. And then also for experimental development, 45 and 35 and 25 as shown on the screen. For more information, please visit our general guidance on the gov.uk site, as you will find the detailed breakdown of research categories, intervention rates and everything else relating to this as part of the competition. So please take a good read through that as you go through the application process. On the next slide here, you will see the project cost categories that you will be filling in as you go through your application. Now, the project cost categories are broken down into the 7 on the screen. So labour, overheads, materials, equipment usage, subcontractors, travel and subsistence and other. Now, you can also find detailed guidance on how to fill in your finances on our YouTube site, and we will pop a link in the chat to that later on in the briefing. So on the next slide here, you can see the information surrounding conditions of award. So as you can see here, you can see the YouTube channel that you can use that relates through, there's a video on there relating to the Subsidy Control Act. So a full financial review will be conducted on your organisation as part of the subsidy control regime. So we need assurance that you will meet your financial obligations when they fall due and that it will function without the threat of liquidation for the foreseeable future. You should therefore ensure that your organisation is eligible before you submit an application. And if you're unsure, please seek independent legal advice. Further information is also available on our website, and our support team are always on hand if you have any direct questions. So if you have an outstanding final claim or an AIR on a live Innovate UK project, you will not be eligible to apply as a lead or collaborative partner. If you have applied to a previous competition but did not make a substantial effort to exploit that award or failed to comply with the grant terms and conditions, then we will not award you any further funding. Again, if you have any direct questions relating to this, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Moving on to the previously submitted applications. So this competition does allow you to use a previously submitted application, and you can see here on the screen how we differentiate between the two. So a previously submitted application is something that is not materially different from one you have submitted before, but it can be updated slightly based on assessor feedback that you have received. Something we would deem as not a previously submitted application is a brand new application, project or idea that you have not previously submitted into an Innovate UK competition, or a previously submitted or ineligible application that has been updated based on assessor feedback. It is also materially different from an application submitted before, and it also fits with the scope of this competition. So on the next slide here, you can see a quick overview of some key dates. So obviously the competition opened yesterday on the 3rd of July, and we have today's briefing event on the 4th. Submission deadline is 11 AM on the 20th of September 2023, and if eligible, you will be sent to a written assessment. Those successful after the written assessment will be invited to an interview panel that will take place between the 20th and the 23rd of November, and applicants are due to be informed on the 19th of January, providing that we get all of the announcements and approvals required. Next slide, please. So just a note on the application deadline, so we can track site usage and submission uploads. And this table gives you a brief overview of what it looks like each hour leading up to the 11 AM deadline. As you can see, most submissions come in the final couple of hours before the submission, and so site usage is high at that time. We would advise you to submit as early as possible, so if you do come up against any technical issues, we have time to help you. On the morning of submission, please get in touch with our customer support services early so that they can help you with any technical issues. And if you are having any problems, it's really important that we've got them logged on our system. Once the deadline has passed, your application cannot be submitted and won't be accepted. So please be really mindful of this 11 AM deadline. So moving on, just a little bit around if you're successful. So following the assessment phase of the process, you will then be allocated a point of contact within the project setup team. So once you've been through the application process and you have been deemed successful, this is when you'll move into project setup. Once in project setup, there is a further 8 steps to complete, and you can see on the screens these include filling in the project details, the project team, uploading any documents that are requested from you, monitoring officer allocation, bank details, finance checks, spend profile, and then finally the signature of a grant offer letter. So work can only commence on the project once you have signed and returned the grant offer letter. And please make sure you are looking out for the prompts from our IFS system, as these prompts mean there's something new that you need to do or action in order to get project setup complete. The sooner you provide us with the information as you go through project setup, the sooner we're able to get your project underway and payments being made to you. So finally, I just wanted to run through with you some additional support. So as you can see on the slide here, there is further information on our YouTube channel about the application process. So as you can see, there's a snippet here of a few videos available to you, but there is also more. So I would highly recommend using the link on the slide here to go and have a look at these videos as you go through the application process. These videos go through everything from how our assessors assess your applications to how successful applications are selected to funding, and then how you then go through project setup as well. So they're really worth a watch, and they've been put together to help you through the process. So please go and take a look at those. So at Innovate UK, we are on a mission to embed equality, diversity and inclusion in everything we do. So we believe that great ideas can and do come from anyone and everyone. We also are very aware that diversity and inclusion in businesses contributes to enhanced innovation, satisfaction, performance, and ultimately commercial success. If you would like any support around this point, please do contact our customer support service team on the email address and phone number on the screen. Again, we'll share these details at the end of the briefing. So we also offer at Innovate UK the opportunity to work with our partner Diversity and Ability. Now, Diversity and Ability are a partner that we work with to help with anybody that has any exceptional circumstances or needs any additional support. If you would like to use this as part of your application, we would ask you to contact our customer support services team as early as possible before the deadline so that we have plenty of time to help you. You then complete a request form which will be sent to our partner Diversity and Ability. Now this can be on your own or with our customer support team, but we can aid you through that process. Diversity and Ability will conduct a discovery conversation with you after you've filled in this form, and they will help make reasonable adjustment recommendations. Diversity and Ability will then organise and deliver bespoke reasonable adjustments for you and with you. Finally, you then have to submit your application using the same process as everyone else within the competition. So again, at this point, I'm just going to emphasize the fact that that 11 a.m. deadline is final and we can't make any extensions to this. And then finally, to talk you through a little bit about Innovate UK Edge. So on the next slide, you can see here a little bit of information about Innovate UK Edge. Again, there's a short video on YouTube that is well worth a watch about the support that Innovate UK Edge can provide you. Innovate UK Edge is a key part of Innovate UK's deep investment in pioneering businesses that drive economic growth. It is a publicly funded service available to all high potential small to medium sized innovation driven companies, including Innovate UK grant winners. So again, this slide gives you a bit more information. If you receive an award, you will be contacted about working with innovation and growth specialists at Innovate UK Edge. So these specialists focus on growing innovative business and ensuring that projects contribute to their growth. Again, there's a bit more information on the screen about who Innovate UK Edge are and what they do, but please go and watch that YouTube video because it's well worth a watch. And then finally, we've got some time to answer some questions for you. But while we go through the Q&A, we're just going to put some contact details up on the screen for you. So as you can see here, you've got contact details for Innovate UK and the Advanced Propulsion Centre as a whole. So I'm just going to take a look at the Q&A box to see if there's anything in here already. But whilst we do so, again, please just pop anything in the box. We'll be happy to answer any questions. So we do have one question that reads, for an OM, we prefer to protect the IP, which means we're not able to share the outputs. The output of the project is the industrialization and the product technology for the OEM. What will that score less?
Okay, I'll pick that one up. So this is a question on behalf of an OEM, but we'll treat it as a general question, to be perfectly honest. The process doesn't require you to hand over any IP. Within the collaboration, within the consortia, you have a collaboration agreement that's legally binding where you define the roles and how you're going to manage IP. Having said that, when you fill out an application, you will have to answer those questions. But you don't have to provide any IP or any confidential information, but you do have to explain the technology and what's taking part within the project. So if you need a follow-up discussion on this, please get in touch with us, info@apcuk.co.uk. You also provide a public statement, so it's very much under control what gets released and what doesn't get released by the applicants themselves.
Perfect, thanks, Dan. So I will just leave the Q&A box open for a short while longer for you to add any questions in there that you might have at the moment. I would like to emphasise at this point that we are on hand to help as we go through both Innovate UK and APC. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us at any point during the process with all of the information shown on the screen. Again, just to reiterate, we can make this slide deck available to you. We can also share a copy of the recording. And if you go back to the Innovation Funding Service where you originally found the link for this briefing, you can also listen to this recording shortly after today's session. So all the information should be on hand for you. So we don't currently have any more questions, so I think we will wrap up there for today. We very much look forward to seeing your applications come through and talking to you over the next few weeks to assist with any questions relating to your application. Thank you to everyone on the call today who's helped with questions and any presenting done during the webinar. And again, we very much look forward to receiving your applications.